The rain hadn't stopped for days. The small wooden house at the edge of the forest looked even lonelier under the gray sky. Inside, an old woman with silver hair warmed her hands by a flickering fire. That was when she heard it. A cry outside, faint yet desperate. She opened the door. There, shivering and drenched, was a small creature with golden eyes that gleamed in the dark. It whimpered once, and her heart softened. She thought it was a lost dog. She didn't know yet. It was a wolf. The wind howled like a wounded beast, echoing through the pines. The old woman stepped into the mud, her shawl clinging to her frail shoulders. She knelt beside the trembling animal, its ribs showing, its fur matted with cold rain. "Poor thing," she whispered, wrapping it in her old blanket. The creature didn't resist. It simply leaned into her warmth. Inside, the scent of burning wood filled the air. She placed the bundle near the fire, rubbing its back gently. Its breathing slowed, and for a moment, she smiled, feeling a rare comfort. She hadn't had company since her husband passed away years ago. "Rest, little one," she murmured. "You're safe here." But as she stroked its fur, the golden eyes opened again. Eyes too sharp, too knowing for a common dog. Something ancient flickered in their depths, something wild. Still, the old woman only smiled. "You'll be my friend," she said softly. And from that night, the wolf stayed. The storm ended by dawn, leaving the forest silver with mist. The woman brewed tea, humming an old lullaby from her youth. The little animal slept by the hearth, chest rising and falling like a child's. She placed a small bowl of soup beside it and whispered, "Eat when you wake." For the first time in years, her house didn't feel empty. When it finally stirred, it limped toward her, tail low but eyes curious. She laughed. "You're a shy one, aren't you?" The sound of her laughter filled the cabin like sunlight. She decided to call it Shadow, because it had appeared from the dark. And Shadow, as if understanding, blinked once and stayed close. Outside, the trees swayed, whispering secrets. In the distance, faint howls echoed from the valley. Shadow's ears twitched, but it didn't move. Instead, it pressed its head gently against her leg. The old woman smiled. "You're home now." Days turned into weeks, and Shadow grew stronger. He followed the woman everywhere, through the garden, down the dirt path, even to the river bank. When she chopped wood, he sat watching. When she sang, he listened. Their silence together was never empty. It was gentle, like the rhythm of rain on leaves. Sometimes she forgot she lived alone. Neighbors occasionally passed by, warning her, "Careful, Mother Ruth, wild dogs roam these woods." She would chuckle softly. "Mine's no wild dog." "He's just lonely." Shadow would tilt his head as if he understood the words. And when she smiled, he wagged his tail like any loyal pet. But deep in his gaze, something lingered, untamed, ancient. At night, when the moon rose, he'd stare at it for hours. Ruth once found him howling softly, mournfully to the pale light. She placed her wrinkled hand on his back. "You miss your kind, don't you?" Shadow only leaned closer, as if to say, "You are my kind now." One afternoon, a hunter came by her gate. He carried a rifle and a sneer, his boots muddy from the forest trail. "Ma'am," he said, "there's been a wolf around these parts? Killed 2 deer already." Ruth's heart skipped. "A wolf?" she repeated, feigning calm. "Yes, ma'am." "Big one. You best keep your dog inside." Shadow appeared in the doorway, golden eyes fixed on the man. The hunter stiffened, hand drifting toward his weapon. But the wolf didn't growl. He only stood protectively beside Ruth. The old woman smiled faintly. "See? Harmless as can be." The hunter muttered something and left, uneasy. When he was gone, Ruth sank into her chair. Her hands trembled slightly as she stroked Shadow's fur. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Shadow pressed his head into her lap, rumbling softly. Outside, the forest wind howled like a distant echo of his kin. The first flakes of winter drifted down like feathers. Ruth wrapped herself in wool, watching the world turn white. Shadow bounded through the snow, leaving deep paw prints in the drifts. He seemed alive in the cold, his coat thick and glimmering with frost. For the first time, Ruth saw the true power in his stride. He brought her kindling every morning, sticks clenched between his teeth. Sometimes he'd sit guard by the firewood pile until dusk. Ruth laughed softly. "You're smarter than any dog I've met." She didn't realize how true that was. At night, she dreamt of wolves running free under moonlight. But the snow made food scarce, and wolves hungered in the hills. Distant howls grew closer with each passing night. Shadow paced restlessly by the door, torn between two worlds. Ruth would touch his fur and whisper, "Stay, my boy." And though his eyes turned to the forest, he always did. A storm rolled in, fierce and black. The wind screamed through the cracks in the cabin. Ruth sat by the fire, coughing softly, a blanket around her shoulders. Shadow lay beside her feet, watchful, every muscle alert. Lightning flashed, and the forest roared. In the middle of the storm, something thudded outside. Shadow was up instantly, teeth bared. Ruth grabbed her lantern, heart pounding. When she opened the door, a stag lay in the snow, its throat torn open. Around it, faint paw prints led into the dark. She turned to Shadow, whose muzzle was clean but trembling. He looked at her, eyes wide with guilt or instinct. She felt a pang of fear for the first time. Yet when he rested his head on her knees, she couldn't hate him. Instead, she whispered, "It's not your fault, my wild child." Word spread through the valley. "Old Ruth's got a wolf living with her," the hunters murmured. "She's lost her mind," others said, shaking their heads. Children whispered stories of glowing eyes watching from the woods. Ruth ignored them all, tending to her friend in peace. One morning, she found a dead rabbit at her doorstep. It was laid neatly, untouched except for the neck. She gasped softly, "An offering, perhaps?" Shadow watched her reaction carefully, tail low, waiting. She smiled sadly. "Thank you, Shadow. You still tried to take care of me." But the fear among the villagers grew. Traps began appearing near her property line. She burned them one by one, cursing softly at their cruelty. Shadow circled her protectively, his instincts flaring, and Ruth began to wonder, how long could peace last? Spring came late that year, and with it, strange behavior. Shadow grew restless, pacing from window to door. He'd vanish for hours, returning with the scent of pine and blood. Ruth waited patiently, pretending not to notice the stains on his fur. She only said, "You always come back. That's enough for me." But one night, she followed him. Barefoot, heart heavy, she crept through the forest shadows. Under the moonlight, she saw him, running with a pack of wolves. They moved like smoke through silver trees, wild and free. And yet, when he saw her, he stopped and ran back to her side. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "You could leave, but you stay." He pressed against her, whining softly. It was love, fierce and wordless. That night, she didn't call him a dog anymore. She called him what he was, a wolf who chose her. Seasons turned, and Ruth grew frail. Her hands trembled when she poured tea, her breath shorter with each winter. Shadow stayed close, fetching wood, guarding the house. He scared off foxes, even a bear once, leaving claw marks on the door. He was her shadow in truth, her final protector. One morning, she didn't wake easily. The fire had gone out, and frost lined the window. Shadow nudged her gently, whining. She smiled weakly. "I'm just tired, my boy." He lay beside her, keeping her warm through the day. That night, the moon rose full and bright. Shadow lifted his head and howled, a deep, aching sound. It wasn't a call to the wild, but to fate itself. He knew something the forest hadn't yet told him. The end was drawing near. Snow fell again. softer this time, like a blanket for the earth. Ruth sat by the window, eyes distant, memories flickering like candlelight. "I've lived long enough," she murmured, "but I wish I could see spring once more." Shadow rested his head on her lap, eyes wet, breath heavy. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't leave her side. One night, the fire burned low, and her breathing slowed. She reached out, fingers brushing his fur one last time. "My good boy," she whispered faintly. "Thank you for staying." Shadow whimpered, pressing closer, unwilling to accept it, and as dawn broke, her hand slipped from his paw. The cabin grew still, the air frozen in grief. Shadow stood, trembling, his breath misting in the cold. He lifted his head and howled to the heavens, long, mournful, eternal. The forest answered, the sound echoing for miles. And so began the wolf's vigil. The house was colder without her voice. Dust settled slowly, the fire gone out, the tea untouched. Shadow sat by her chair for hours, nose pressed to her shawl. He nudged her slippers gently, waiting for her to move, but she never did. The smell of stillness filled the air, death, but also love that lingered. He dragged a blanket over her body with trembling teeth. Then he lay beside her once more, eyes half closed, guarding. Outside, snow covered the roof like a shroud. Inside, only the sound of his breathing remained. Days passed. Hunger gnawed at him, but he wouldn't leave. Crows gathered by the window, black against white. He growled at them, protective to the end. When the wind rattled the door, he whimpered softly. He still believed she might wake. On the fourth day, the forest called. Shadow stood by the door, torn between instinct and devotion. The smell of pine, of life, beckoned, but he turned back each time. Finally, he approached her one last time. He pressed his forehead to her hand and let out a low, broken cry. Then he did something strange. He left, only to return hours later. In his jaws, he carried wildflowers from the riverbank. He placed them beside her and sat quietly. The old wolf had learned from her what humans do for love. He had brought her a burial gift. When the first light of dawn touched her face, he howled again. This time, it was not for her to wake, but to send her away. Wolves answered from the distance, mourning with him. He turned his head to the woods, eyes hollow but clear. And at last, Shadow stepped into the forest. The forest was vast, older than memory. Shadow moved through it like smoke, silent, ghostly. He followed deer trails, crossed frozen rivers, and slept under stars. But no matter how far he went, he always circled back, to the place where her scent still lingered. He no longer hunted with fury, but with sorrow. He ate little, drank from melting snow. Each sound of cracking branch made his ears twitch. Each echo of wind reminded him of her voice. He carried her memory like a wound that never healed. In spring, he returned to the cabin once more. It was half collapsed, the garden wild with weeds. He lay on her porch and stared at the door that never opened. Sometimes, he dreamed of her soft hand brushing his fur, and when he woke, he howled to the empty sky. Months later, the same hunter from before came again. He was older now, his rifle rusted from the damp. When he saw the wolf near the ruins, his breath caught. "So it's true," he whispered. The beast stayed. Shadow stood, his gaze steady but calm. The man raised his gun, heart pounding. But something stopped him, the sight of wilted flowers by the door. He lowered the barrel slowly, shame burning his chest. He realized the creature wasn't guarding prey. It was guarding love. The hunter stepped back, leaving food near the gate. Shadow didn't touch it, only watched. When the man was gone, he sniffed the offering once, then howled. It was not a cry of rage, but of forgiveness. The forest carried it far beyond the valley. Years passed in quiet rhythm. The forest grew, healed, and forgot. But Shadow did not. He grew older, slower, his fur silvering like hers once did. Yet every spring, he returned to that lonely hill. He would sit by the porch, watching the sunrise. The birds sang above him, unafraid. Deer grazed nearby, sensing his gentleness. He had become part of the forest's peace. But inside him, the ache still pulsed. Sometimes travelers saw him from afar. They spoke of the ghost wolf of the pines, a spirit who guarded a forgotten home. They said if you listened close, you could hear him hum, the echo of an old woman's lullaby. One winter morning, Shadow found something strange. A small pup, lost and shivering under a fallen branch. Its whimpers pierced the cold like tiny bells. He nudged it gently, recognizing the pain of loneliness. The pup licked his muzzle in thanks. He carried it back to the ruins of the cabin, laid it by the fireplace where warmth once lived. The pup curled into his fur, trembling but safe. Shadow stared into the cold ashes. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose. He hunted again, carefully, teaching the little one to survive. Together they roamed, one limping, one learning. The pup followed every move, every sound, and when night came, it slept beside him in peace. The circle had begun anew. As the pup grew, the cabin began to fade further, roof sagging, windows gone, time reclaiming what was hers. But Shadow still returned, even when storms came. He would sit before her empty chair, silent, remembering. The young wolf would tilt its head, sensing reverence. Sometimes Shadow would whine softly to the air, as if speaking to someone unseen, and then he'd lift his head high and howl, a low, broken hymn. The pup joined him, learning the song of grief. Together, their voices braided through the trees. Travelers said that two wolves now haunted the old woman's home, one old and gray, one young and bright-eyed. But they did not bring fear, only silence and awe. For in their cries, there was no hunger, only love that refused to die. One night, the full moon rose higher than ever before. It painted the forest silver, the air sharp and clean. Shadow stood on the ridge, the young wolf beside him. He felt something stirring deep in his chest, a call, ancient and final. He threw his head back and howled long and clear. The sound shook the trees, reached the far mountains. Every wolf for miles answered in kind. It was as if the earth itself was singing farewell. The young one howled too, voice trembling with youth. When the echoes faded, Shadow looked at the moon. He thought of her, sitting by the fire, smiling softly. He closed his eyes, heart full, breath slowing. The wind swept gently through the pines, and Shadow finally lay down to rest. The next morning was still and bright. The young wolf nudged Shadow's still body gently. No movement came, only peace. It sat beside him for hours, refusing to leave. Then, when the sun reached the trees, it lifted its head and sang. The forest listened, the same melody of morning Ruth once heard. Deer paused mid-step, birds went silent, the world bowed its head. When the song ended, the young wolf looked toward the cabin, and for a moment the air shimmered. It was as if an old woman stood there, smiling faintly. The young one lowered its head, then turned toward the woods. It did not forget. Wolves never do. It carried the song in its heart and the memory in its blood. A teacher, a mother, a legend had passed on, but love, like the forest, would always renew. Years later, villagers told the tale to their children, of an old woman who once lived alone in the forest, and of the dog she raised who turned out to be a wolf. They said he stayed by her side until her final breath, and even after death, he never left her home. Some swore they saw two shapes in the mist, a gray wolf and a woman with silver hair walking side by side. Others claimed to hear a lullaby when the wind blew from the north. Whatever the truth, all who heard the tale felt its warmth. A story of love that defied the wild. And so, the cabin became a sacred place. The villagers left offerings of bread and flowers by the gate. No one dared to harm a wolf again in those woods, for they knew the spirit of loyalty still watched over them. The wolf had stayed, and his love became legend. Years rolled quietly across the valley. The young wolf had grown, strong, silent, and graceful. Yet it never left the hill where the cabin stood. Each dawn, it walked the old paths Ruth once trod. Each dusk, it lay beside the grave under the oak. Hunters no longer came to those woods. They said the place belonged to something sacred. The wolf guarded it, not with fangs, but with presence. Birds nested nearby, deer grazed without fear. The forest itself seemed calmer where it lived. Sometimes it would raise its head toward the horizon. The moonlight caught its fur, glinting silver like its ancestors. In that glow, it looked almost human, filled with memory. And if you listened closely, you could hear a whisper. "Stay," it seemed to say. "Just stay." One summer morning, a boy wandered into the woods. He was small, curious, and braver than he should have been. He carried a wooden flute his grandfather had carved. Drawn by a strange calm, he followed the winding stream until he saw golden eyes watching him from the trees. He froze, breath sharp in his throat. The great wolf stepped forward, majestic, unafraid, but instead of growling, it merely sat down and stared. The boy trembled, then slowly raised his flute. A soft tune drifted through the clearing like a prayer. The wolf tilted its head, listening. It blinked once, then lay down, tail curled around its paws. The boy played until his fingers ached, then smiled shyly. "I'll come back," he whispered. The wolf watched him leave, eyes gentle as dusk. Days turned into weeks, and the boy kept his promise. Each afternoon, he returned to the clearing. He brought bread, fruit, and music. The wolf began to wait for him, appearing from the shadows like a ghost. Together, they shared silence that felt like friendship. Sometimes the boy would talk as he played. He told stories of Ruth, the forest grandmother, as villagers called her. The wolf would listen, tail swaying slowly, eyes soft. It was as though it remembered every word already, as though the boy's voice carried echoes of the past. One evening, the boy asked, "Do you miss her?" The wolf raised its muzzle toward the stars. Its howl rose, deep and mournful, shaking the trees. The boy wiped his tears, whispering, "I think she hears you." The wind seemed to agree, brushing gently through the leaves. But peace is fragile, even in sacred places. One night, flames appeared on the horizon. A lightning strike had ignited the dry pines. The fire spread fast, crackling through the valley like fury. Smoke rolled toward the cabin hill. The boy saw it from afar and ran. "Wolf!" he shouted, coughing through the haze. The forest was burning, animals fleeing in terror. He found the wolf standing firm before the cabin, unafraid, guarding it even as fire roared closer. "Come with me," the boy cried, tears streaking soot. But the wolf would not move. It turned to the house instead. As the flames neared, it howled one last time toward the sky, and then it vanished into smoke and light. The fire swallowed everything, but not the story. When the fire finally died, the hill was black and bare. The boy searched the ruins for hours, heart heavy. The cabin was gone, only stones and ash remained. But under the oak, the earth was untouched. And there lay 2 paw prints, pressed deep into the soil. The villagers came to help rebuild what they could. They wept for the loss, but marveled at the miracle. No wolf's body, they said, only marks in the earth. It was as if the forest itself had spared their spirits, as if love had turned to wind and risen above the smoke. The boy placed his flute among the ashes. He whispered, "Thank you for protecting her home." Then he turned to the forest and bowed deeply. From far away, faintly, a howl answered through the mist. Soft, endless, eternal. Years later, a new forest grew from the ashes. The oak survived, its roots deep, its branches wide. Beneath it, wildflowers bloomed each spring without fail. People said the tree whispered when the wind passed through. Words that sounded almost like an old woman's hum. Children often played near the clearing. Sometimes they'd swear they saw shapes in the fog, a wolf and a woman, side by side, watching. The villagers stopped cutting trees nearby out of respect. The place became known as the Hill of the Wolf. Each year, on the night of the first snow, they left gifts, bread, fruit, and a small candle for the grandmother of the woods. The flame always burned steady, no matter the wind, as if someone, or something, protected it, as if loyalty itself lived on in the roots below. The story traveled beyond the valley. Travelers told it in inns and mountain villages, a tale of a woman who loved a wolf and was never alone again. Poets turned it into song, painters captured its sorrow. It became more than legend, it became truth to the heart. Some said the wolf was an angel in disguise, others believed he was the forest's guardian spirit, but all agreed on one thing, that love, once given freely, never dies. It only changes form. Generations passed, and the forest grew wise with memory. People who walked its paths felt a strange comfort, a warmth in the air, even in deepest winter. And if you stayed long enough, you'd hear it, a soft howl, carrying her name through the trees. One night, a young woman from a faraway town came to the hill. She was a writer, weary of city life and noise. She'd heard the legend and wanted to see it herself, so she camped beneath the oak, pen in hand. The forest seemed to breathe around her. As she drifted to sleep, a strange dream came. An old woman sat by a fire, humming softly. Beside her, a wolf rested, eyes glowing gold. "Write what you see," the woman whispered. "Tell them we stayed." She awoke with tears on her cheeks. Her notebook was open, words she didn't remember writing. They told the whole story, from rain to fire, life to legend. She whispered, "Thank you," into the night air. And the wind answered with a gentle howl. Spring returned brighter than ever that year. Birds nested in the oak, and the forest was alive with color. The villagers came together to rebuild a small hut on the hill, not to live in, but to honor what was lost. They called it the Keeper's Cabin. Inside, they placed a wooden flute, a silver locket, and a carved wolf. Each item told a part of the old story. Visitors who entered said the air felt thick with memory. Some swore they heard footsteps at night, soft and light. Others said they felt a warm breath near their hand. Children grew up knowing the tale by heart. They spoke of Shadow and Ruth as if they were family. And in truth, they were. The family of the forest. A bond written not in blood, but in devotion. A love too pure for time to erase. One evening, the sun set in golden fire. The forest shimmered, every leaf a piece of memory. From the ridge above the valley, a howl rose once more. It was not sorrowful this time. It was proud, eternal, a song of love that had transcended all things. The people stopped and listened, hearts full. Even the river seemed too quiet to hear it. It was as if Shadow's spirit still roamed the hills, guarding, as if Ruth's gentle voice still hummed beside the sound. Together, they sang the world to peace. And when the stars emerged, the forest glowed faintly. 2 shapes could be seen walking under the moon, one tall and graceful, one 4-legged and silver gray. They vanished into the mist, side by side, and their story, whispered by the wind, would never end. Decades passed, and the world changed beyond the hills. Machines roared, cities grew, and silence became rare. But in the village below, an old storyteller still spoke of the wolf. By the fire's glow, children listened with wide eyes. "He stayed," she said, "because love taught him to." Every winter, she climbed the hill with her cane. She left a piece of bread beneath the oak tree. She claimed she could still hear footsteps beside her, and sometimes, faintly, a hum in the wind, a lullaby older than memory. Before she died, she whispered to her grandson, "When I'm gone, keep telling it. The world forgets too quickly. Remind them what stays. He promised, though he didn't yet understand. Years later, he would. The storyteller's grandson grew up restless. He left the village chasing the noise of cities. But at night, strange dreams followed him. A forest of silver mist, a cabin, a pair of golden eyes, and a voice whispering, "Come home." He ignored it at first, calling it folklore. But the dreams grew stronger with each year. He'd wake to the scent of pine and firewood, and once, he swore he saw paw prints on his apartment floor. It frightened him, but also called to something deep inside. Finally, one spring, he returned to the valley. The forest greeted him with silence and birdsong. The oak still stood, older, grander, alive. Beneath it, the air shimmered like heat on snow. And he knew then that the story had waited for him. He knelt by the roots and touched the soil. It was warm, as if something slept beneath. He placed his hand over it, and the earth seemed to breathe. Then the wind rose gently, carrying a low, soft howl, not of pain, but of welcome. He whispered, "Is it true? Were you real?" The forest answered with the sound of leaves. Somewhere distant, a wolf cried again. He felt tears on his cheeks, though he didn't know why. He had never believed, but now belief found him. He left a candle and his grandmother's flute by the roots. The flame danced even as wind swept the clearing. He thought he saw two shapes standing in the glow, an old woman and a wolf, side by side, smiling at him before fading into mist. That night, the whole valley woke to a sound, a howl, deep, resonant, echoing from mountain to sea. It carried through windows and hearts alike. Old villagers crossed themselves, whispering prayers. Children woke smiling, as if from a gentle dream. It was the first howl in decades, but no wolf tracks were found in the morning snow. Only two shapes pressed side by side beneath the oak, one large, one small, a sign that love had returned once more. The young man stood on the hill and listened. He didn't feel afraid. He felt home. Something ancient stirred inside him. Not blood, not memory, but spirit. And when he closed his eyes, he could almost hear her say, "Stay." Among the villagers was a painter who saw the world differently. After the night of the howl, she dreamt of the forest glowing gold. She woke before dawn, trembling, inspired. By noon, her brush was moving across the canvas like wildfire. She painted what no one else had seen, but everyone felt. On the canvas, an old woman knelt beside a wolf. Between them, a candle burned, never fading. Behind them rose the oak, its leaves whispering. She called it the promise, and the painting changed her life. When displayed in town, people wept before it. They said it felt alive, that it breathed. No matter where it hung, the eyes of the wolf followed you softly, and in quiet rooms, some swore they heard faint howling, the kind that sounded like love remembering itself. Seasons passed and the legend grew. Travelers left offerings beneath the oak, stones, poems, and bread. At night, small lights flickered among the roots. No fireflies, no lamps, just quiet, glowing orbs. The villagers called them the forest's tears. Each year, on the anniversary of the first howl, they gathered on the hill in silence, old and young, rich and poor, standing together. They sang a song without words, carried by the wind, a promise whispered by hearts, not lips. In the hush of that night, a soft breeze passed through. The oak's branches swayed like arms in blessing, and far away, from the mountains, came a single long howl. Every heart lifted at once, aching and whole. The wolf still stayed. One autumn, a traveler from another land came to the valley. He had heard tales of the wolf who stayed. Curious, he sought the hill beneath the ancient oak. He found no shrine, no statue, only silence and wind. But in that silence, something stirred. He camped there for the night, unable to leave. In his dreams, he saw her, the gray-haired woman. She smiled at him, eyes bright with peace. "Tell them," she said softly. "Tell them kindness never dies." And beside her, the great wolf bowed its head. When he awoke, his notebook was full. Words he hadn't written covered every page. He read them aloud, voice trembling. And somewhere in the forest, a howl answered him. He left the next morning changed forever. Years blurred into centuries. The forest grew taller, wilder, untouched by man. The cabin's remains sank into the roots of the oak. But when storms came, the wind still sang through the valley. Not with fury, but with melody. Birds carried seeds across the land, birthing new life. Wolves still roamed the hills, golden-eyed and proud. Each generation seemed to remember the old bond. They never harmed the village. They watched it, silently, faithfully. And when children asked their elders why wolves never attacked, the elders smiled and said, "Because one of them learned love here long ago." The children would look to the forest with wonder, and the wind would hum softly in agreement. Time flowed on, erasing faces but not echoes. The village became a town, the oak a landmark. Tourists came to see it, unaware of what it truly was. But among them lived one last storyteller, old, frail, kind. She still began each tale the same way. It started with rain. Her voice trembled, yet the story never lost its magic. People leaned close, listening, hearts softening. Even skeptics left in silence, wiping their eyes. For the tale spoke not of beasts, but of devotion, of how love outlives everything it touches. That night, after her final telling, she sat by her window. A wolf's howl echoed faintly beyond the town lights. She smiled, whispering, "I kept my promise." Then she closed her eyes peacefully, and the wind carried her words home. At dawn, the valley shimmered beneath the rising sun. Mist curled around the oak, gold and silver entwined. And for a heartbeat, two figures stood there again. A woman with gray hair, gentle as dawn, and a wolf beside her, proud and eternal. They walked together toward the forest's edge. Each step a memory, each glance a farewell. When they reached the trees, they paused once, looking back. The wind brushed through their forms, scattering them like light, and the forest exhaled, peacefully, completely. Now, when the wind passes through those woods, you can still hear their song if you listen. A woman's hum, a wolf's soft howl, woven as one. A promise carried through centuries of quiet devotion. He stayed, and in that staying, love became immortal.